Here we are in a week of May the 18th, and man, I tell you what, I don't know, kind of got picked in a way and kind of volunteered in a way of subbing this class out for a little while, and well, I tell you what, I think I would have picked a different time to sub out if I'd have looked through some of what we were going to be getting into. Righteous romance. Righteous romance. All week I've kind of struggled around. I'm 42 years old. Been married approximately 16 years. I kind of still feel like a newlywed. And I'm standing in front of the seniors class. I don't want that word to offend you. You don't mind getting a seniors discount if you go through the line somewhere, do you? So, okay, if that doesn't bother you and you take that discount, it doesn't bother you for me to say. You earned it. Exactly right. Exactly right. And society is really the culture shift, and society has taken the honor out of age. But here we are, feeling very inadequate, and I'll take that and use it as humility and allow God's strength to be perfected this morning. How many, when we think about righteous romance, let me read the scripture and then I'll start into Solomon, the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 7 and 8. Tell me, O thou who my soul loveth, where thou feedest, where thou makest thy flock to rest at noon. For why should I be as one that turneth aside by the flocks of my companions? If thou know not, O thou fairest among women, go thy way forth by the footsteps of the flock, and feed thy kids beside the shepherd's tents. Sounds like dating's changed a little bit. Sounds like culture's changed a little bit. And I thought about standing in front of this class and some of the track records that you have. Married 50 plus years, 60 years. At 50 years, that's 10 times longer than the national average for half the marriages that get started today. Culture's changed. If we were to pass around index cards today to everybody in the church house, and Sister Bryn, this is part of maybe what you had brought up. If we passed index cards to everybody, and we passed cards to every couple and asked the woman to write down things about her boyfriend, her fiancé, her husband, and we asked the men to do the same thing about her, wouldn't we agree that those who have been married 50 years or those being married 60 years would know a whole lot more about their spouse than someone who had just gotten married? I would hope so. I would hope so. I'm not promoting this show, but when I was little, I'm not promoting it because it used to get pretty ornery. But when I was little, I used to enjoy watching the Newlywed Game. And they'd have contestants on there, panel of contestants. I think there was about 4 or 5. And they would sit there as couples. And they'd ask the young man some questions about his wife or about their living area. And they'd ask the woman questions, and it was always very amusing. Of course, they'd ask the questions in a certain way, but it was always amusing how strange, differently the answers were. Well, if you've been married 50 years and went on that newlywed game, you would definitely win. You surely, to goodness, would not lose. There's righteous romance. And romance is to lead to a relationship with one another. Dating is ultimately a step toward marriage. Dating is not something that should be taken lightly. It's not something that should be taken loosely. It is something that should be taken with much thought, but yet at the same time, you can't take it so serious to the point where, okay, I've dated somebody once, we're going to get married in a month. Here we are, we see Solomon sharing with his son about a romance, and I believe a romance that had taken place, but of course God can use that one romance and elevate it to the point to show forth His love toward us as the lost, His love towards us as the church, and how He has wooed us. How many, and there may be some here this morning, maybe Sister Christine might have a testimony like this after hearing hers a time or two, but how many here just received God the very first time they heard about God, the very first time He touched their heart? Anybody here that had just jumped right in and received God the very first time? Nobody this morning? Okay. I sure wasn't that way. There was quite a period in my life where I learned about God, I heard about God. Even when God convicted me, I still turned Him away. And looking back over my lost years, like Brother Bob has challenged us to do, I look back and I've even used the word, and I feel this way, look how God wooed me. Is that the noise you're talking about? Okay, let me take off my jacket. That God wooed me, that He would go out there, He would present Himself, He would, and He wooed me, brought me in, and I believe God does that. Solomon is saying, listen, son, all of our actions ought to be Christ-like. All of our actions ought to be God-like. We ought to woo, put those feelers out. When we're attracted, having a relationship that's open and have a romance that is a godly romance. Let me read a few things or share a few things with you about Solomon and his romance. Solomon was a smooth talker. Listen to some of these. Throughout the Song of Solomon, Solomon describes his beloved with the terms of complimentary that the readers might not usually see or use today. In chapter 4, he refers to her eyes, we'll see this in a few moments, as the eyes of a dove. Among other things, he also said that her hair was like the lock or flock of goats. Her teeth were like sheep. Her lips were like thread. Her neck was like a tower. And Solomon's emphasis on her eyes reflected cultural belief that the eyes were represented the beautiful person on the inside. When he looked in her eyes, he saw peace and sincerity, which made her even more attractive unto him. David, I believe, at one time referred to the eyes as a calf. You know, I don't know if we would really get a large following if we started going around and saying, your teeth remind me of sheep. Your hair is as flocks of goats. And your eyes remind me of cows' eyes. I don't know if we would really. That's probably not the advice that I'm going to give my boys. But as the culture has changed, if you look at the value that they had in sheep, if you look at the value that they had in goats, if you look at the agricultural today and how these animals sustained life, we see that Solomon and even David, his father, that they were saying to their loved one, the one that they were wooing, the one that they were trying to flatter, that you are reminding me that you are as important of life itself. Without you, my life would not be what it is. Without you, my life would be miserable. Without you, my life would at a point come to a spot where it would not exist. You bring comfort into my life. You bring peace into my life. When I gaze into your eyes, I see who you are. And when we start talking like that, we start saying, wait a minute, Solomon is a romantic. I don't know how true this is. I've read this, and I don't know where to verify this, but from what I read, boys were not allowed to read the Song of Solomon until they reached a certain age back in the culture of that day, because it was so passionate. And we have a hard time understanding how your hair is like flocks of goats, how that would really get people worked up in, especially in the culture that we live in. We sure don't have a romantic culture, and we sure don't have a righteous romance today in our culture. The culture and society is tearing apart the sexual relationship that God intended people to have. And that relationship that God intended, God set forth in the garden at the very beginning of humanity as God made man in His likeness. And He took from man woman and created woman and brought her to Him. And as they two, I mean, think about the romance there in Adam. He says, for this reason, for the rest of the time span of humanity, for this reason, for this cause, will a man leave his father and his mother, and these two shall become one flesh. These two will come together and have a new creation, a new family. And God has given us that institution or that unit as one man and one woman as marriage, has given us that physical relationship inside of that to not just to hold us together, but to share one with another. And not only to share one with another, but then to create and to create life and to be an instrument, a tool that God uses. God made worms. You divide a worm in half and they reproduce. I'm glad that that's not the way it works with me. God could have made reproduction a lot different than it is. I mean, I am glad I'm not a starfish that can get a limb cut off and sprout up a child. I'm glad I'm not a worm that's cut in half and that's how they reproduce. I am thankful that God, in His wisdom, and Solomon sharing some of that wisdom, be careful, have the romance, yes, but have that righteousness inside of romance. Have that vision, have that goal that's so much more than just self, so much more than just a mutual agreement between two people. Have that as a romance that shows forth God's righteousness. God chose marriage to show the institution of His relationship as Son and the church. And here we are, we must be careful. All right, the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verses 7 and 8. We see that these two have a desire to be together. One is wondering, where are you? How do I find you? How can I get to you? And the other one's calling out, hey, come by the shepherd's tent. And as a king, it would not have been uncommon. Think about the the logistics. Think about the infrastructure of a kingdom. It would not be uncommon for Solomon to be about the flocks. It would not be uncommon for Solomon to be about the shepherds. And she's saying, where would I find you in all the kingdom of Israel? Where would I find you in all the hills of Israel? Where would I find you? And he says, I want you to be with me. I want you to find me. I want you to come by the shepherd's tents. I'll be right there. A relationship is about being together. I don't like long-term or long-distance relationships. I just don't like them. I don't think that's the way God intended them to be. I'll be quite honest with you. I believe we hurt our marriages when we have to have today, and this seems like a necessity, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of adjustments that could be made. When we have to have 3 jobs in a family, when we have to work 90 hours a week in a family, 120 hours a week in a family, I don't think that God made us to be apart, but He made us to be together. And it's really hurting the structure of the family when we're apart, when we're apart, when we're apart. You know, 80 years ago, we worked as a society. I don't say we as in me, but we worked as a society those 100 hours, those 120 hours, but we worked at home. The wife had her work, her chores, hard work, real work, worked from sun up to sundown. We found out a week or so ago that the candle was lit and worked past sundown. And the man worked around the house, but there was sleeping together, waking up together. There was the eating together. There was the disciplining together. There was some of the relaxation time together. There was going to bed together. So there was a togetherness even though the family worked almost constantly. Now today we're living in a society that works not for togetherness but works for recreation. We wonder why our church culture has changed. And there's a lot of things that add into why things have changed in our churches today. But one of the things that touches our churches is marriage. One of the things that touches our churches is families. And our churches in part have changed because our marriages have changed. Our families have changed. Our culture has changed, and our culture, unfortunately, has influenced the church more, it seems, than maybe the church has influenced our culture. It's about being together. Our marriages ought to be about being together. Our families ought to be about being together. Our churches ought to be about being together. And folks, we're missing this. We get up now, and if the family is a unit, over 50% of the 4th grade children in Burnside Elementary School, over 50% live outside of mother and father. 50% live with grandparents or in foster care or some other way. An aunt, an uncle, a neighbor, over 50%. Now that affects the church. I don't care if you think it does or not. That affects the church. When 50% of marriages end in the first 5 years, that affects the church. When our culture change and marriages is on the decline, I mean, fewer people are getting married today, and yet the divorce rate is going up. Fewer people are getting married, but the divorce rate's going up. That affects the church. That affects all of us. That affects society. That affects a lot of children. We'll get children 1 week. Every 3 weeks, we'll get children downstairs. And you say, wait a minute, that shouldn't be that way. Well, that's the week that mom gets them, or that's the week that dad gets them, or that's the week that grandma gets them. That affects that child. That affected me growing up in a divorced family. That affected me in church. So here we are, we understand that things affect us and cultures change. And culture's not helping marriage, not helping dating, not helping the family. but it's about being together. I enjoy seeing people court. And I sometimes see more than y'all think. I do. I've watched courtships through this sanctuary that people think I don't know exist. And I'm smart enough just to keep my mouth shut. Barely. And I watch these stir around. Sometimes they fall apart, and that's fine. And sometimes they come together and they grow, and I call it festering, and that might not be the most romantic word when talking about dating, but I watch them fester. In June, we're gonna have a marriage with Sister Missy and Brother Barry. I'm excited about that. I enjoy watching the courtships. I enjoy watching folks come together. I enjoy watching the engagement. I enjoy marriages. I do. I mean, and that might sound, I enjoy marrying people. I enjoy watching people come together and getting married. I enjoy that. A lot of ministers today don't like it. I'll go to a pastor's conference, or I'll talk about pastors, and they say, I hate doing marriages. Shame on them. Shame on them. Marriage is a picture of Jesus Christ in the church. Shame on a pastor who doesn't like to see people get married. I love seeing people get married. I love the marriage ceremony itself. I love seeing people come together. I love it when it's a young man and a young woman. I love it when they're pure. I love it when there's been a chaste in their life. I love it when it's a virgin and she can wear white and it's for real. I love it when it's a picture. I love it when the candles come together and are lit. When the song is played and she walks down the aisle. I love being part of a marriage. I am thankful when I'm asked to do a marriage. It's a privilege. It's like being a baptism today. It is a privilege for me as a pastor to be entrusted by a church to baptize an individual. It's awesome. It's part of the payday. Marriage is part of the payday. I enjoy doing those marriages. I enjoy every part of it. And I enjoy watching marriages. I enjoy watching folks. I enjoy going to the mall. I don't enjoy shopping, but I enjoy going to shopping areas and sitting down with old men and watching people go by. And I enjoy watching those young couples, and I enjoy watching older couples. I enjoy watching those young couples who get all choked up and don't know how to talk to one another. I enjoy watching those old couples who've been so long they don't have to talk to one another. They look like one another. They've lived together so long that they look like one another. I love that. I love that. I don't know how that happens, but it happens. I enjoy seeing a relationship when people are together so long that they know one another's thoughts, they know one another's likes, they know how to finish one another's sentences, they know what they want before they want it. I enjoy seeing every stage of relationship except that stage where it's rocky. Except that stage where it's hurting. Except that stage where there's a void in the relationship. Turn with me, if you will, to the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verses 15. Or chapter 15, verses 15 on a little bit. Verse 15, Behold, thou art fair, my love. Behold, thou art fair, thou hast dove eyes. Verse 16, Behold, thou art fair, my love, yea, pleasant. Also our bed is green. The beams of our house are cedar, and our rafters are fir. Chapter 2, verse 1. I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys, and the lily among thorns, so is my love among the daughters. There is a mutual admiration There is a respect. There is a love that is shared. I heard a preacher say one time, and I'm going to pick on preachers. I heard a preacher say one time about his wife, and he was in a sanctuary, and I believe, honestly, with their relationship, I believe what he said. He said, I told her I loved her when I told her I loved her, and I told her if that ever changed, I'd let her know. He said, I meant what I said when I said it, and if it changes, I'll let her know. Shame on him. Shame on him. Solomon is saying, listen, boy, you better tell your wife you love her. Tell her, flatter her. Go over and over. In 2 verses, thou art fair, thou art fair. Thou have eyes as a dove, thou art pleasant. Our bed is green. Once again, not a culture that we understand, but their bed was fresh. Their bed was soft. A couple of years ago back, we had a few years of drought. And I'm not a barefoot walker. I'm not really barefoot in my house. I'm not really barefoot on the porch. I'm not barefoot out in the yard. If I'm barefoot out in the yard, I'm kind of like that cat on the hot. I'm just not comfortable walking barefoot. Never have, and I just probably never will be. But how many remember back when it was so hot and dry and the grass turned tan and then it turned brown, and you walk out there and it goes crunch, 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 crunch. Solomon says, I'm rolling in my sweet baby's arms. That's what he's saying. He's saying, my bed is fresh, my bed is young, my bed is exciting, it is good to be king. Amen. He's saying, it's pleasant. Nothing old at my house. Nothing boring at my house. Nothing stale at my house. No pricklies at my house. It is a green bed at my house. And honey, you're the reason why I am the man that I am. Maybe that's why kids weren't allowed to read this till they got to a certain age. He says, look at this, honey. I want you to behold this. He says, you're beautiful and you don't even know it. Look at this for a moment. Behold, thou art fair. You're a beautiful woman. You're my love. Behold, look at this. You're fair. Your eyes remind me as a dove's eyes. Behold, thou art fair. He goes over and over again, my beloved. You're pleasant. I'm going to try this one. I'm going to try this some evening when my wife gets off work. I'm going to say, honey, you are pleasant. She'll probably say, what do you want? I'll say, no. You're my love. You're fair. You've got eyes like a dove. She'll say, what do you want? Billy Graham used to tell a joke, and for those visiting today might not know me very well, I'm not a joke teller. And I might even get it wrong, but I'll try telling it. Billy Graham told a joke where his wife was working real hard today. She was just frazzled. The kids, it was just one of those days. And her husband, it'd been a week. They had that just an awful week. And the kids, oh my goodness, the house was a mess. Her hair was out all over. He comes home from work. He thought, I'm just going to woo my wife and sweep her off her feet this evening. So he stops by and he gets some candies and he gets some flowers and he gets dolled up a little bit and he comes home. He says, instead of just barging in and sitting down in my recliner and asking her to get me a drink out of the fridge. I'm gonna be romantic. So he gets up to the door and he rings the doorbell, and he's standing there with his chocolates under one arm and his flowers in one hand, and he's sitting there smiling. And about that time, the door opens, and she's just as ragged as she could be, tired, wore out, and down. And she says, "Oh no!" He said, "What's wrong?" She said, "After the week I've had, after the day I've had, and now you come home a-drinking." I guess maybe, fellas, what I'm trying to say is maybe if you've not been wooing your wife and flattering your wife and giving her those compliments, maybe we ought to ease into this. Maybe we ought not to jump in all at once and start complimenting her, but ease into it. So what does this mean to us? Well, in part, our culture has changed. And maybe the way you date it, when you date it, has changed from the way people date today. And maybe the way people showed their affection when you were younger has changed from the way people show their affection today. And yes, sin is the way that it is, but I want to say this. People are starving for affection. People are wanting to show affection. And the reality is, because of the influence of the culture, people just don't know how to do it properly. And affection turns into sex. And how people romance turns into sex. And what I'm trying to say is, we need to see that proper display of public affection and not no affection. And that's an area I have to work on. My wife and I have very little public display of affection. It's always been very private. That's something that's very private to us. I'm even uncomfortable really talking about it to you. But pray for me. Pray for us. Because a couple things are taking place. One, people watch us. People are watching you as grandparents. They've watched you as parents, and now they're watching you as grandparents, and this church is watching you. So I'm not asking you to display no affection. I'm asking you to display proper affection, a godly affection. And help me, pray for me that my wife and I, we don't, and you maybe don't either, we don't have that communication openly, and we don't have that show of affection openly. I'm doing my children as a dad an injustice when they don't see affection, when they don't see public affection, when they don't see that. That's doing them an injustice. So they look around and they say, well, what is affection? I don't know. I'm not seeing it here. And as I grew up, I thought, hey, nobody in the church has fun. Church is thou shalt not. But Jesus said, I come that you have life and have it more abundantly. And in the proper context of marriage, in the proper context of relationships, in the proper context of righteous romance, that mutual admiration, we grow into relationship where we come together. And even a great marriage, Solomon goes on in chapter 2, verse 15, it says, take us the foxes, the little ones that spoil the vines, and our vines have tender grapes. So, I use this a lot talking about church and our church relationships, and that's not wrong, but Solomon really used it in a context of marriage relationships. He says our vines have matured, there's fruit on the vine, our fruit is young, and we have to be careful because of the little foxes. Even a good marriage relationship has to be careful. Has to be careful of the things that come in and intentionally or unintentionally tear it up. I don't really fully understand this, but, a fox, I don't know if a fox really eats grapes. I don't know if a fox really has the mind intention of destroying a vineyard. I don't know if the fox says, hey, I woke up this morning and what I'm going to do this afternoon is go down and destroy a vineyard. I don't think that's really what's on the fox's mind. A fox simply comes in the vineyard and just doing what foxes do, running around, tearing things up, being skittish, but running, tears up that vine and tears up that tender vine and tears up that tender fruit. And it bruises the fruit, it ruins the fruit and can ultimately damage the vine to the point where that fruit dies. We have to be careful because, folks, that fruit's our next generation. Our fruits, is our future. That fruit is our reward. And we have to be very careful. We have to not only be careful in our marriages and be careful in our relationships, but Solomon goes on to say we need to treasure our treasures. And first of all, we need to once again elevate. Sister Bryn, thank you for bringing that to our attention today. We need to elevate what society has robbed. We need to recover. The Bible tells us to redeem the time, for the days are evil. Times are evil. So the days have been robbed. The time has been robbed. It's been stowed away. We need to buy it back. And that takes sacrifice. But you know what? Society has robbed, Sister Bryn, you're right. Society has robbed old age. We went from being elders to burdens. And it didn't happen overnight. But that's where we have come to in our society. I'm not calling you that. But that's where we've come to in society. You're not a burden, you're an elder. And you have that experience. Brother Ed, open those doors, thank you. And society has stolen marriage, and we need to buy it back. Society has stolen family, and we need to buy it back. Society has ruined our churches. We need to buy them back. How do we do that? Not really by anything we can do, but by focusing upon Jesus Christ and lifting up His name. Let us pray.